And that's what it feels like doing a podcast by yourself. What's going on, everybody? This is the Coverbandconfidential podcast, the podcast for cover band musicians and band leaders to learn how to rock more and suck less. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson, and not here is Dan, because Dan is on vacation. And this is a grand experiment, because I have never done a podcast by myself, but we'll go ahead and give it a shot this week. All right, so let's do some catching up and some housekeeping stuff. So the first thing is the gig recap from the 4th of July. If you were in the Patreon, you saw how painful my load-in was. But this was basically doing 4 hours at a country club in the middle of the day, noon to 4, about an hour from where I live. And the load-in was down, I think, 3 flights of stairs. There wasn't any sort of way to get closer to where I was. Besides that, as I was taking my last trip to bring my gear in, somebody on staff asked if I knew where the shortcut was. And it turns out that if you hop a curb, you can go around to the back of this area and not have to go down a bunch of stairs. Now, the issue with that was there was a car blocking the section of the curb that I could have hopped. So even if I had known that ahead of time, I wouldn't have had a chance to use it, and I would have been blocked in by more cars on my way out. But the plan was to do 4 hours, and I was like, I think I can do most of it, not take a bunch of breaks. The things I did not take into account were the weather. It was incredibly hot, and also the fact that I hadn't done a 4-hour standing gig all year. And it turns out that my fingers were just not up to the challenge of playing that long. So I opted to start doing 45-minute sets, taking 15-minute breaks. And that was the only way that I honestly made it through that gig, because it was oppressively hot. And one thing that I've never experienced before is that I brought my air mover with me, but it was working too well. Meaning that since it was blowing on my back, I wasn't sweating, and it actually had the opposite effect of what it normally would have, which is it made me much warmer than I would have been otherwise. So what I had to do was literally stand out in the sun to start sweating, and then move the air mover so that it was blowing on me and drying that sweat off, which is how your body cools itself down. It was really interesting. I've never had that happen before, but most of the time I'm not in direct sunlight like this, and it was just kind of the perfect storm as far as that goes. The heat and weather and stamina aside, it was pretty fun. I got a chance to play a bunch of stuff. It's always kind of interesting when you're doing some sort of like public event where there are kids and parents and grandparents. You're just trying to find stuff that kind of hits all of those notes. So I was doing everything from like Frank Sinatra to Smash Mouth, but like the Smash Mouth songs that are in kid movies, to make sure that the little ones have something that, you know, sounds familiar to them. So the last issue that I ran into was, because it was so hot, I was having issues with some of my gear. I'd put my QSC K12 out in front of the cabana that I was standing under. I was under mostly shade, and it was in direct sunlight, and I wasn't sure if that was going to be an issue, but at literally 3:55, 5 minutes before I was supposed to wrap up, the speaker just started putting out nothing but noise. And I was kind of concerned, because that is a speaker I use for all of my gigs. And so I powered it down and then turned it back on. And then the second that the fan kicked on, the noise started again. And so that pointed to it being a heat-related issue. I managed to be graceful, end the gig, and pack my stuff up, but I was pretty worried about how that was going to go over. So the next day, when I was unpacking stuff, I brought the speaker into my office, plugged it in, and it was totally fine. So I think it was something related to the heat, but this is the other K12 that I had not gotten serviced. And so now I'm a little bit gun shy about using this. And we've got a bunch of gigs coming up that we will use that particular speaker for. And so I'm considering picking up or renting one for the next few dates that we have outdoors in the event that something bad happens. Hopefully that's not the case, but you never want to be in a situation where you're not prepared for anything that could potentially go wrong. This week, I don't have any gigs, but starting next week, we've got a gig pretty much every weekend through the rest of the summer. I hopped onto a logistics meeting for an event that we're doing next Thursday, which is a tie-in with the local pop radio station. So they've been promoting it hard, and we've been getting a lot of good press because they've got a really large distribution channel. And so that's been great. And we have some stuff that we need to handle this week. I found out yesterday that we all have to sign waivers to perform at this place, and then I have to take out an insurance policy. Still trying to figure out which policy I need to take out. I've gone through a couple of different companies, Event Pros, but I've been using K&K for recent gigs, and their pricing seems to be better, so I'll probably use them, but I gotta make sure that I'm buying the right policy so I can send them what's called a COI, Certificate of Insurance, in order to have this date go off without a hitch. The next gig that we've got after that is the Southern Fried Gaming Expo 80s Prom, which we've done a number of years. The only wrinkle there is that we have a sub drummer who we haven't worked with before. Supposed to hop on a call with him in the next few days to make sure that we've got everything lined up. But that gig is pretty fun, other than the turnaround of the room that we're playing in, because basically there is going to be a big wrestling match, and then they shut the room down, and 60 minutes later it opens back up and the band's supposed to start. So it's a bit of a run and gun kind of setup, but we've done it before, and I think we can kind of mitigate all of the other factors and make sure that we have what we need when we need it and be good to go. All right, let's get into some housekeeping. I want to thank everybody who picked up the ebook. I got some emails this week and some DMs saying that some folks had bought it and that they really enjoyed it. Very grateful for anybody who is interested in what I have to say. If you want to pick it up for yourself, you can now get it on the Kindle store. I'm still waiting on approval for Google. I'm not sure what the issue is. I uploaded the manuscript to both platforms, and Amazon took it, Google didn't, whatever that means. Also, the Maestro Team X review is live. I put that out on Friday, and it's gotten really good response. There's a very lively discussion going on in the comments. And just as a reminder, if you use discount for CBC at checkout, you get 10% off of that unit. I'm going to be putting it through its paces on our first gig on this coming Thursday. And I got the moving heads all set up. I think I'm going to put them on our giant Rubik's Cubes flanking the drum set. I think that's going to look really cool, and looking forward to seeing how it goes. It's definitely going to be a learning experience and probably have to make some adjustments, but overall, it's going to be great. Speaking of discounts, we have a bunch of other partnerships with other companies that can save you some money. And if you go to our link tree, you can find discounts for Gear by Seba, which is gear for modelers, labels and screen protectors and that kind of thing. There's also a $10 credit to Sticker Mule, which a lot of folks are using for merch and giveaways and that kind of thing. So check out the link tree. It's in our bio on all of our socials, and I'll put it in the show notes for this week's episode. Also wanted to shout out one of our patrons, John Bonney, who has been a patron for a while, switched from monthly to annual this week, saved himself 10%. We're all about saving money here. So if it's something that you're interested in doing and joining the community, you can pay a year up front, save 10%, and have access to all of the perks that are in the Patreon, and you can save yourself a few bucks. So go do it. Speaking of things that you should do, we got some reviews coming in finally. This one actually came in through the website. If you go to coverbandconfidential.com, there's a contact form, and some people use it to ask questions that we end up talking about on the show, coaching opportunities, and lots of other things. This one comes from Paul De Silva, who has a band called The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. Great name. It says, "Hey guys, been listening to you guys for almost a year now, and we follow you guys on Instagram. Keep up the great work and content. Also, let's get some more drummers on the pod." Big thanks to Paul for reaching out. And for all of the drummers out there, I'm actually going to be interviewing a drummer this week. I'm not sure when that will be released, but hopefully it'll be next week, and me and Dan can build ourselves a little episode buffer, which would be nice, especially during the summer months. So be on the lookout for that. All right, let's get into the topic I want to cover this week. This one came in via email, and this came from Mark Tater. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Mark says, "Hey guys, may I suggest a topic for future episodes? Tips, tip jars, etc. When is it appropriate? How much do we push it or mention it without sounding like cheap salesmen, etc.? The thought came to me during a gig yesterday, and it dawned on me that we're asking for suggesting tips at a venue, in this case a bar, who are there for the same money, but we're already getting paid a set amount. If you've covered this already, my apologies. I didn't find an episode about this specifically. Thank you for creating such a great podcast." So thanks for reaching out, Mark. And we have definitely covered this in passing on a couple of episodes over the years, but I figured it was worth revisiting. Now, let's talk about the two different scenarios that you would be contemplating this tip question. And that would be public gigs versus private gigs. So let's talk about public gigs, bars, nightclubs, performance venues, that kind of thing. It is pretty common for bands to put out tip jars at those kinds of gigs. It's almost expected at this point. And so I don't think it's weird to do that and mention it on stage, but I understand the feeling of, well, other people are working at this venue that aren't getting paid what we're getting paid. Is it cool to draw attention to it? And I think the answer is yes. And I think this is a mindset thing. I think we should come at all of this from a place of abundance, and that there's enough money for everybody to go around. And so I would say don't feel weird about mentioning it. I would say, I think a solid number would be no more than 3 times per set. But if you feel kind of weird about it, I would say draw attention to it while also spreading the goodwill around to the other folks that work there. So say, hey, we've got a tip jar up here if you are enjoying yourself. Also be sure to tip Stacy, who's back there working hard for you at the bar. So kind of make it an opportunity to draw attention to the other folks that are working while also drawing attention to your tip jar. And if you want to garner some goodwill and you have a good night as far as tips go, tip out the wait staff. There have been a number of gigs where we had a really good night and we made good tips, and the bartenders also took good care of us, so we tipped them out. It's important that you show your appreciation for those people, and we've said it multiple times on other episodes that particular goodwill can manifest itself down the road because people move venues, they get promotions, and maybe the bartender that you tip one week is the manager at the other venue the next week. So always be willing to share the good stuff with the people around you, and it should hopefully pay off for you. Now, the other category of gigs would be private gigs. Now, this would be like birthday parties, maybe not at like a general corporate event, but there's a particular loophole that I'll get to in a second. The way that we've always approached tip jars at private events is it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. We pretty much always put a tip jar out. The way that I have always kind of looked at it is if we put one out and then the client has an issue with it, we'll put it away. And anecdotally, I have never had a client ask us to put the tip jar away. So I don't think it's as big of a deal as other people may think it is, or we think it is, because I think it's just a general accepted thing, at least in the States. I know that might be different wherever it is that you're from, but I don't see a problem with it. Put it out. You don't necessarily have to draw attention to it. Maybe you can. Maybe at a private event, you don't draw attention to it. You just leave it there. And, you know, the way that we kind of look at it is the client paid for your services, but a part of your service is entertaining their guests. And so putting a tip jar out gives those people, their guests, an opportunity to show their appreciation. So I 100% believe that not putting a tip jar out is leaving money on the table. And also you're robbing the guests of that event the opportunity to show their direct appreciation to you. So looping back around to what I was talking about as far as a loophole in corporate events. So maybe you have signage that has QR codes on it, and maybe that QR code links to a particular page on your website that allows you to accept PayPal or Venmo. I don't see a problem with that at all. I would say there's enough hoops to jump through for somebody to pay you that way that it's not overt or inappropriate to have something like that up at a corporate gig. But like all things, your mileage may vary. We've definitely done corporate events where the show ended and I check our inbox and we got 5 t-shirt purchases and maybe $20-30 in our Venmo account. Because people are there, they're having a good time. Why not give them an opportunity to find out more about you and maybe throw a couple of bucks your way? And that's pretty much it. Hopefully, Mark, there's some stuff in there that works for you and your band so that the next time you guys have a gig, you have the confidence to put your tip jar out and pitch it appropriately. But like I said, I say spread the good word around. Make sure that everybody wins, and you should be good to go. All right, folks, that's going to do it for this week. I really miss Dan. This was a lot harder than I thought it would be to do by myself. He is the Sonny to my Cher. I don't know how the dynamics work, but it's nice to have somebody to talk to on a podcast versus just doing one yourself. If you'd like to support the show, you can do it a number of ways, but we'll let Mike take it from here. I'll go ahead and call it for this week. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Adam Johnson, and you've been listening to the Coverband Confidential podcast for the week of July 12th, 2024.